Welcome to His Stories, the place where real men's truths finally get told. If you're new here, you're in good company. We don't sugarcoat, we don't make excuses, and we sure don't pretend that life always goes according to plan. This is where brothers come to share the raw, unfiltered experiences that made us who we are today. Let's dive in. A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. That's Proverbs 16:9. And let me tell you something, fellas. Sometimes those steps lead you right through hell before they lead you home. Sometimes the person you trust most in this world is the very one who teach you that trust ain't something you give away for free. My name is Michael Peters, and I'm about to tell you how over 40 years of marriage taught me the difference between loving someone and being a fool. Picture this. You're 75 years old, sitting in your own kitchen at 6 in the morning, staring at a cup of coffee that's gone cold while you try to make sense of the woman you've loved for over 4 decades. The same woman who just looked you dead in the eye and said, "Michael, you're just too stupid to understand what I need." Now, I've been called a lot of things in my 75 years on this earth, but stupid? That cut deeper than a rusty blade. But that wasn't even the worst part, brothers. The worst part came 3 hours later when I went to the ATM to get cash for groceries and saw those numbers on that little screen. 0, 0, 0. Over 40 years of marriage, 47 years of working, a lifetime of building something together, and just like that, it was all gone. My wife, Diane, didn't just take my money. She took my dignity, my future, and damn near my will to keep breathing. You ever had someone you love completely destroy your faith in everything you thought you knew about people? You ever been so blindsided that you question your own sanity? Well, pull up a chair, because I'm about to tell you how a woman I would have died for taught me that sometimes the biggest betrayal comes wearing the face of love. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. Where you watching from? Let's see where our brotherhood stretches, because every man needs to know he's not alone when the world comes crashing down. Let me take you back to where this all started. Back to Detroit in 1948 when I was born to James and Ruby Peters in a little house on the east side that my daddy bought with his own sweat and determination. My father worked at the Ford plant for 32 years. Came home every night with grease under his fingernails and pride in his heart. My mama, she cleaned houses for white folks during the day and took care of her own family at night, never once complaining about being tired. Growing up, we didn't have much money, but we had something worth more than gold. We had each other. Sunday mornings meant mama's buttermilk pancakes, thick as a phone book and sweet as heaven. The smell would wake me up from 3 rooms away, mixing with the sound of Mahalia Jackson coming from Daddy's old radio. "Boy, get yourself down here before these cakes get cold," Mama would call, and I'd come running in my bare feet across those creaky wooden floors. Daddy taught me everything about being a man by never saying much at all. He showed me how to change oil in our old Buick, how to fix a leaky faucet, and most importantly, how to treat people with respect. "Son," he'd say while we worked side by side in our little garage, "a man's word is his bond, and his handshake is his contract. You remember that." I remember the day I graduated high school in 1966, Mama crying so hard she soaked through 3 handkerchiefs. "My baby's going to college," she kept saying, even though we all knew college wasn't in the cards. Instead, I got a job at the post office, starting at the bottom but determined to work my way up. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work, and in our house, honest work was what separated the men from the boys. The neighborhood I grew up in was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where Mrs. Johnson next door would whip you for acting up just as quick as your own mama would, and where the sound of dominoes clicking on Mr. Washington's front porch meant all was right with the world. We had block parties where the music would play until midnight, where the older folks would tell stories that made us laugh until our sides hurt, and where young couples would dance slow and close under the streetlights. It was at one of those block parties in 1975 that I first laid eyes on Diane Thompson. Lord have mercy, that woman was something to behold. She had skin the color of honey, eyes that sparkled like stars, and a smile that could stop traffic on 8 Mile Road. She was visiting her cousin Patricia, who lived 2 streets over, and when I saw her standing by the record player swaying to the Temptations, I knew I had to introduce myself. "Excuse me, miss," I said, walking up with all the confidence I could muster. "But I believe you're the prettiest woman at this party, and I'd be honored if you dance with me." She looked me up and down, taking her sweet time, then smiled that smile that will become both my blessing and my curse. "Well, aren't you smooth?" she said. "I suppose one dance wouldn't hurt." That one dance turned into talking until 3 a.m, sitting on Patricia's front steps while she told me about her life in Cleveland, how she was a secretary at a law firm, how she loved reading romance novels and watching old movies. I told her about my job at the post office, my dreams of maybe opening my own business someday, and how I believed in treating a woman like a queen. By the time the sun came up, I was already planning our wedding in my head. You know how it is when you're 27 and you meet someone who makes you believe in fairy tales. That's what Diane did to me. She made me believe that love could conquer anything, that two people who cared about each other could build a life together that will last forever. We courted for 8 months, with me driving to Cleveland every other weekend in my daddy's old car, bringing flowers and staying at the YMCA because I wanted to do things right. Diane would show me around the city, take me to jazz clubs where the music was smooth as silk, and introduce me to her friends, who all seemed impressed that she had found herself a good man from Detroit. Her family was different from mine. When my folks were simple, hardworking people who lived paycheck to paycheck, Diane's father owned a small restaurant, and her mother was a school teacher. They had a bigger house, nicer furniture, and what Mama would have called high-class problems. But they welcomed me with open arms, especially when they saw how much their daughter loved me. "That boy's got good character," heard Diane's father tell his wife one evening when they thought I couldn't hear. "He looks at our girl like she hung the moon." And I did. God help me, I absolutely did. Our wedding day, June 12th, 1976, was the happiest day of my life up to that point. We had the ceremony at Mount Olive Baptist Church in Cleveland, with Pastor Williams officiating, and a reception in the church basement that felt like the celebration of the century. Diane looked like an angel in a white dress, and when she said "I do," I felt like the luckiest man alive. We moved to Detroit right after the honeymoon, into a little 2-bedroom house I'd been saving for on the west side. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I remember our first morning as husband and wife, waking up to find Diane already in the kitchen trying to figure out the old electric stove. "This thing doesn't work like the one at my mama's house," she said, pouting in that cute way that made my heart skip. "Don't worry, baby," I told her, wrapping my arms around her waist. "We'll figure it out together. We got all the time in the world." Those early years were like something out of a dream. I'd come home from the post office every evening to find dinner waiting and Diane excited to tell me about her day at the insurance company where she'd gotten a job as a claims adjuster. We'd sit at our little kitchen table, eating and talking about everything and nothing, making plans for the future. "I want us to have kids," she'd say, her eyes lighting up. "At least 3, 2 boys and a girl." "Whatever makes you happy, baby," I'd tell her. "I just want us to be together." But the kids never came. After 5 years of trying, we went to see doctors who ran tests and asked questions and finally told us in gentle voices that sometimes these things just weren't meant to be. I watched my wife cry for weeks after that news, and it broke my heart to see her dreams crumbling. "Maybe we could adopt," I suggested one night as she lay in my arms. "It's not the same," she whispered. "I wanted to carry your babies, Michael. I wanted to give you sons who looked like you." "You're enough for me," I told her, and I meant it. You're more than enough. Instead of children, we poured our love into other things. We fixed up that little house until it was the prettiest one on the block, with a garden in the back where Diane grew tomatoes and collard greens. We took vacations to places like New York City and New Orleans, where we'd walk hand in hand and pretend we were rich folks without a care in the world. Diane had this way of making ordinary moments feel special. She'd light candles for dinner even on Tuesday nights, put on music and dance with me in our living room until we were both laughing like teenagers. When I got promoted to supervisor at the post office in 1985, she threw me a surprise party with all our friends and neighbors, complete with a cake that said, "Congratulations to my hard-working man." "I'm so proud of you," she whispered in my ear that night. "You deserve everything good that comes your way." Sunday mornings became our special time. We'd sleep late, then I'd make breakfast while she read the paper, and we'd spend the whole day in our pajamas just enjoying each other's company. She'd curl up next to me on the couch while we watched old movies, her head on my shoulder, and I'd think to myself that this was what happiness felt like. "You know what I love about you, Michael?" she said one lazy Sunday afternoon in the early 90s. "What's up, baby?" "You make me feel safe, like nothing bad could ever happen as long as you're here." I kissed the top of her head and promised myself I'd spend the rest of my life making her feel that way. We had our share of disagreements, of course. Diane could be particular about how things should be done, and I sometimes thought she spent too much money on clothes and household things we didn't really need. But we always talked through our problems, always went to bed with our differences settled. "Marriage is work," she'd say when her friends complain about their husbands. "But with the right man, it's work worth doing." For over 30 years, I believed that with all my heart. I believed we were building something that would last forever, something that would see us through to our golden years when we'd sit on our front porch and watch our grandchildren play in the yard. I believed that love was enough to overcome anything life threw at us. The years rolled by like pages in a book. The 80s brought Reagan and recession, but we weathered it together. The 90s brought new hope and prosperity, and we bought a bigger house in a better neighborhood. The 2000s brought challenges and changes, but we faced them side by side. Through it all, Diane was my constant companion, my best friend, my everything. When my mama passed in 2003, Diane held me while I cried and helped me plan a funeral that honored the woman who'd raised me. When her father died 2 years later, I took time off work to drive her to Cleveland every weekend for months, helping her settle his affairs and comfort her mother. We celebrated milestone anniversaries, silver and then our 40th in 2016, renewing our vows in the same church where we'd marry. Diane looked as beautiful to me at 61 as she had at 21. And when Pastor Jackson asked if I'd take her for another 40 years, I said yes, without hesitation. "Here's to growing old together," I toasted at our anniversary dinner, raising my glass of champagne. "Growing old together," she echoed, but something in her eyes seemed distant, like she was already somewhere else. I should have paid attention to that look, should have asked what was on her mind, but I was too content, too secure in what I thought we'd built together. I believed that over 40 years of marriage meant something, that it created a bond stronger than whatever midlife restlessness might be stirring in either of us. I believed in us. Looking back now, I could see the cracks started showing about 5 years ago, when Diane turned 65 and something shifted in her like a tectonic plate moving deep underground. At first, I thought it was just retirement adjustment, you know? She'd worked at that insurance company for over 30 years. And suddenly having all that time on her hands was bound to create some restlessness. She started talking about all the things she never got to do. "I always wanted to travel to Europe," she'd say out of nowhere while we were watching television. "I wanted to see Paris, maybe learn to speak French." "We can still do that, baby," I'd tell her. "I got vacation time saved up. We could plan a trip." But she'd just shake her head like I was missing the point. "It's not the same now, Michael. We're old. I wanted to go when I was young and beautiful." "You're still beautiful," I'd say, and I meant it. To me, she was just as gorgeous as the day I met her. "You have to say that," she replied with a bitter little laugh. "You're my husband." Then there were the new friends. Diane joined some kind of book club at the library, which I thought was great at first. She'd always loved to read, and I figured it would be good for her to get out of the house more, meet new people. But these women, they filled her head with ideas that didn't sit right with me. "Linda's getting divorced," she announced one evening after her book club meeting. "That's too bad," I said. "What happened?" She says she wasted 40 years of her life taking care of a man who never appreciated her. She's moving to Arizona to start fresh. I looked at my wife. trying to read the expression on her face. Well, every marriage is different, baby. Some folks just aren't meant to be together. Linda says I should think about what I really want out of life before it's too late. What do you want out of life? I asked. She was quiet for a long time, then said, I don't know anymore. The computer was another warning sign I should have paid more attention to. Diane suddenly decided she needed to learn about the internet, said she wanted to connect with old friends and explore new interests. She spent hours in our spare bedroom, clicking away at that machine like it held the secrets of the universe. What you doing in there, baby? I'd ask when I'd find her still at the computer at midnight. Just research, she'd say, without looking up, learning about investments and retirement planning. I thought it was smart of her to take an interest in our financial future. I'd always handled the money in our family, but I figured it couldn't hurt to have two people keeping track of things. When she asked me to add her name to all our accounts, I signed the papers without hesitation. We're a team, I told the banker. After over 40 years, my wife should have access to everything we've built together. The trip started innocently enough. First, it was a weekend visit to her cousin Patricia in Cleveland, then a girls' trip to Vegas with her book club friends. Each time she came back different somehow, more distant, like she tasted something I couldn't give her, and found our life lacking by comparison. You should come with us next time, I suggested after one of these trips. Oh, Michael, she said with that same bitter laugh, you wouldn't understand what we do. It's girl time. But the biggest warning sign was how she started talking to me like I was a child who couldn't grasp grown-up concepts. When I'd ask about her plans or share an opinion about something, she'd get this look on her face like she was talking to someone who just wasn't very bright. That's not how the world works anymore, Michael, became her favorite phrase. Whether we were discussing politics, money, or our future, she always seemed to know better than me about everything. My buddy Carlos from work noticed it before I did. We were having a beer after our shift one Friday when he said, man, Diane seemed different lately. She used to light up when you walked in a room. Now she acts like you're bothering her just by being there. Marriage goes through phases, I told him, repeating what I'd been telling myself. We've been together over 40 years. Sometimes people need space to grow. Space to grow? Carlos repeated, shaking his head. Brother, that woman's growing away from you, not with you. But I didn't want to hear it. I'd spent over 4 decades believing that love could overcome anything. That commitment meant working through the hard times together. When Diane started sleeping in the guest room because I snored too much, I bought nose strips and tried sleeping on my side. When she stopped cooking dinner and started eating out most nights, I learned to make my own meals and didn't complain. When she stopped saying, I love you, back when I said it to her, I told myself she was just going through a rough patch and needed patience. You're too understanding, my sister Joyce warned me during one of our phone calls. Some women take advantage of a good man's nature. Diane's not like that, I defended her. She's just trying to figure herself out. Michael, baby brother, I've been watching women figure themselves out for 70 years. This ain't that. This is a woman getting ready to do something she knows will hurt you. But I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. Because listening would have meant admitting that the foundation of my entire adult life was crumbling, and I wasn't ready to face that truth. The final warning sign should have been impossible to ignore. 3 months before everything fell apart, Deanne announced she was taking a 2-week vacation to visit her friend Margaret in Florida. 2 weeks seems like a long time, I said carefully. Margaret's going through a hard time with her divorce, Diane explained. She needs support from a friend who understands. Understands what? What it's like to be married to a man who can't see past his own limitations. I felt like she'd slap me, but I tried to stay calm. What limitations are you talking about, baby? Never mind, Michael, you wouldn't understand anyway. She left on a Monday morning, and for 2 weeks I rattled around our house like a ghost, wondering when my wife had started seeing me as the enemy instead of her partner. When she came back, she was different again, more determined somehow, like she made a decision about something important. Did you have a good time? I asked. I had an enlightening time, she said. Very enlightening. I should have asked what that meant. I should have demanded we sit down and talk about whatever was happening between us. But I was scared of what I might learn. So I just kissed her cheek and welcomed her home like nothing had changed. 3 months later, I'd learned exactly what enlightening meant. The morning it all came crashing down started like any other Tuesday. I got up at 6, made coffee, and was sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper when Diane came downstairs already dressed like she was going somewhere important. She was wearing a navy blue dress I'd never seen before and carrying a leather portfolio that looked expensive. "You up early?" I said, looking up from the sports section. "Going somewhere special?" She sat down across from me with that look on her face, the one I'd been seeing more and more lately, like she was preparing to explain something to a slow child. "Michael, we need to talk." Now, brothers, when a woman says those 4 words with that particular tone, you know your world is about to change. I set down my newspaper and gave her my full attention. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, opening that portfolio and pulling out some papers, "about my life, about what I want, about what makes me happy." "Okay," I said slowly. "What kind of thinking?" "I've realized that I've been living my life for everyone else. For you, for this marriage, for what other people expected of me. But I'm 65 years old, Michael, and I need to start living for myself." My heart started beating faster, but I tried to stay calm. "What does that mean, baby?" She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "It means I'm leaving you." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she just said. "Leaving me?" I finally managed. "What do you mean, leaving me?" I'm getting a divorce. I've already filed the papers. You'll be served later today." I stared at her, this woman I'd loved for over 40 years, searching her face for some sign that this was a joke or a test or anything other than what it appeared to be. "Diane, baby, what are you talking about? If there's a problem, we can work it out. We can go to counseling. We can take a vacation. We can do whatever you need." She shook her head like I was proving her point. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Michael. You think everything can be fixed with a simple solution. You think you can patch this up like one of your repair jobs around the house." "I'm trying to understand," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You wake up one morning and decide our marriage is over after over 40 years without even talking to me about it?" "I have been talking to you," she snapped. "For months I've been trying to tell you that I'm not happy, that I need more than this, but you don't listen. You just smile and nod and think everything's fine. Because I thought everything was fine. I thought we were happy." She laughed then, a cold sound that cut right through me. "Happy? Michael, look at yourself. Look at your life. You're 75 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A job at the post office that you never had the ambition to leave, a house that's falling apart, and a marriage to a woman who's outgrown you." "Outgrown me?" I felt like she was speaking a foreign language. What does that even mean? "It means I'm tired of being married to someone who's content to be ordinary. I'm tired of small dreams and small thinking. I'm tired of being held back by someone who's too stupid to see what's possible in life." There it was, the word that would echo in my head for months afterward: stupid. After over 40 years of marriage, 47 years of honest work, 75 years of trying to be a good man, my wife thought I was stupid. "I'm not stupid, Diane," I said quietly. "Aren't you?" She pulled more papers from her portfolio. "Let me ask you something, Michael. Do you know how much money we have in our savings account?" "About 40,000 last time I checked." "Wrong. Do you know how much we have in our retirement accounts?" "Maybe 60,000 total." "Wrong again. Do you know what our house is worth?" "I don't know, maybe 90,000. She smiled that cold smile again. "Michael, you've been so busy being content with your little life that you never bothered to pay attention to the real world. Our house is worth $230,000. Our retirement accounts total $150,000, And our savings account, which you thought had 40,000, it had $98,000 as of last week. The numbers swirled in my head. How could I have been so wrong about our financial situation? How do you know all this? I asked. Because while you were content to let life happen to you, I was educating myself. I learned about investments, about real estate, about building wealth. I've been moving our money into better accounts, making it grow. I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach. What do you mean moving our money? I mean, I've been taking care of our finances like I take care of everything else in this house, like an adult. Our money, I repeated. You said our money. She gathered her papers and stood up. Michael, you're too simple to understand complex financial matters. That's why I've been handling everything. Show me the account statements, I said, standing up too. I want to see where our money is. It's not your concern anymore, she said, heading toward the door. I'm moving out today. My lawyer will be in touch about the division of assets. Division of assets? I followed her to the front door, my mind reeling. Diane, you can't just leave. We can work this out. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. She turned back to me one last time, and the look in her eyes was something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, but something worse. Contempt. Michael, I've wasted enough of my life trying to make you into something you're not. You're a nice man, but you're small. You're limited. You think small thoughts and have small dreams. And I refuse to be small with you anymore. I love you, I said desperately. Doesn't that mean anything? Don't these 40+ years mean anything? Love isn't enough when one person wants to soar and the other person wants to stay on the ground. She walked out the door, got into a car I'd never seen before, driven by a man I didn't recognize, and disappeared from my life like smoke. I stood in my doorway for I don't know how long, waiting for her to come back, waiting for this to make sense, waiting for my world to stop spinning. When I finally went back inside, the house felt different, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. That's when I remembered what she'd said about the money. I drove straight to the bank, my hands shaking as I filled out the withdrawal slip. The teller, a young woman I'd never seen before, looked at the computer screen with a puzzled expression. I'm sorry, Mr. Peters, but this account shows a zero balance. That's impossible, I said. Check again. She checked again, then called over the manager, who looked at the screen and then at me with sympathy in her eyes. Sir, it looks like there was a large withdrawal made yesterday. The entire balance was transferred to another account. My legs nearly gave out. How much was transferred? The full amount, sir, $98,417. I drove home in a daze, then checked our other accounts online. Every single one was empty. The retirement accounts I'd been paying into for decades, the money market account I'd forgotten we had, even the small savings account I kept for emergencies. All of it gone. That evening, while I sat in my empty house, trying to understand how my life had fallen apart in the space of 12 hours, the doorbell rang. A young man in a suit handed me an envelope. Michael Peters, you've been served. The divorce papers were thick and full of legal language I couldn't understand, but one thing was crystal clear. Deanne was claiming I had been financially irresponsible and was seeking to protect her separate property from my poor judgment. My marriage of over 40 years was over. My wife thought I was stupid and she had taken every penny we'd saved together. I was 75 years old and I had nothing. The first week after Diane left, I didn't get out of bed except to use the bathroom and make coffee. I lie there staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how over 40 years of what I thought was a good marriage had turned into this nightmare. Every surface in the house reminded me of her. The kitchen table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, the living room where we'd watched television and made plans for the future, the bedroom where we shared our dreams and fears. The silence was the worst part. For over 4 decades, I'd come home to the sound of Diane moving around the house, humming while she cooked or talking on the phone with her friends. Now, There was nothing but the ticking of the old clock in the hallway and the sound of my own breathing. My buddy Carlos called every day that first week. "Man, you got to eat something," he'd say. "You want me to bring you some food?" "I'm not hungry," I'd tell him, which was the truth. The idea of food made me sick to my stomach. "This ain't healthy, Michael. You can't just lay up in that house feeling sorry for yourself." "What am I supposed to do, Carlos? My wife of over 40 years just told me I'm too stupid to live, then stole every penny I ever saved. Where am I supposed to go from here?" "You supposed to get mad. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to fight back." But I wasn't mad. Not yet. I was just broken. Broken and confused and completely lost. My sister Joyce drove down from Flint the second week, took one look at me, and started crying. "Oh, baby brother," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like the lavender soap she'd been using since we were kids. "Look what that woman did to you." Joyce spent the next 3 days cleaning my house and forcing me to eat while she called lawyers and tried to make sense of the financial mess Diane had left behind. "She cleaned you out," the lawyer told us during our consultation. "Legally, since her name was on all the accounts, she had the right to withdraw the money. But morally, this is theft, plain and simple." "What can we do?" Joyce asked. "We can fight the divorce settlement, argue that the assets should be split 50-50. But that's expensive, and it could take years." "How expensive?" I asked. "My retainer alone is $10,000. I laughed, a sound so bitter it surprised even me. "I don't have $10, let alone 10,000. The lawyer looked genuinely sympathetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Peters. I wish I could help you pro bono, but my partners won't allow it." Walking out of that lawyer's office, I felt lower than I'd ever felt in my life. Not only was I broke and alone, but I couldn't even afford to fight for what was rightfully mine. "We'll figure something out," Joyce said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. The bills started coming due the third week. Mortgage payment, utilities, insurance, all the monthly expenses I'd been paying for years without thinking about them. I had exactly $347 in my checking account and a part-time job at the post office that brought in about $800 a month. I did the math on the back of an envelope. After the mortgage, utilities, and basic expenses, I was short about $900 every month. At 75, I'd have to find another job just to keep from losing the house. That's when the anger finally hit me. I was standing in my kitchen, looking at a stack of bills I couldn't pay, when it felt like something exploded in my chest. Hot, pure rage at the woman who'd taken everything and left me with nothing. Rage at myself for being too stupid to see it coming. Rage at a world where someone could destroy a person's life and walk away clean. I picked up the ceramic coffee mug Diane had given me for my 70th birthday, the one that said "World's Best Husband," and threw it as hard as I could against the kitchen wall. It shattered into 100 pieces, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something other than despair. 40 years, I shouted to the empty house. Over 40 goddamn years. I punched the wall so hard I split my knuckles, but the pain felt good. It felt real in a way nothing else had since she'd walked out that door. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, must have heard me yelling because she knocked on my door a few minutes later. "Michael, you okay? I heard noise." Mrs. Chen was 80 years old and had been living next door for 15 years. She and her late husband had always been good neighbors, the kind who'd bring you soup when you were sick and water your plants when you went out of town. "I'm fine, Mrs. Chen," I lied. She looked at my bloody knuckles and shook her head. "No, you're not fine. Come, I make you tea." I wanted to say no, wanted to go back to my empty house and wallow in my misery, but something in her voice reminded me of my mother, and I followed her next door. Mrs. Chen's kitchen was warm and smelled like ginger and star anise. She bandaged my hand without saying anything, then put a cup of tea in front of me that tasted like comfort. "My husband died 5 years ago," she said finally, 53 years married. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you, first year, very hard." "I want to die too. House too quiet, bed too empty, nobody to cook for." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. But you know what I learned? She continued. Life not over because one person leave, even when that person very important, even when you think you cannot live without them. Life's still there, waiting. It doesn't feel that way, I said. I know, but feeling not always truth. Truth is, you still here, you still breathing, you still have choice what to do next. I sat in Mrs. Chen's kitchen for 2 hours that day, listening to her stories about learning to live alone, about finding purpose after loss, about the difference between being lonely and being alone. Diane, she take your money, Mrs. Chen said as I was getting ready to leave, but she cannot take your character. She cannot take what make you good men. She took everything that mattered, I said. Mrs. Chen shook her head. Money not everything that matter. You still have hands that can work, heart that can love, mind that can learn. She cannot take those things. Walking back to my house, I felt something shifting inside me. The rage was still there, but underneath it was something else, something that felt like determination. That night, I called my granddaughter Keisha. Well, she wasn't technically my granddaughter, but she was the daughter of my nephew Tony, and I'd helped raise her after her father died in Iraq. She was 28 now, working as a social worker in Chicago, and one of the smartest people I knew. Uncle Mike, she said when she heard my voice, I was just thinking about you. How you and Aunt Diane doing? I told her everything, the divorce, the money, the feeling of being completely lost at 75 years old. She listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Uncle Mike, she finally said, I'm so sorry this happened to you, but I need you to listen to me, okay? You are not stupid. You are one of the wisest, most decent men I know. What Diane did to you, that's about her character, not yours. She manipulated you because you trusted her, and trust isn't stupidity. It's what good people do. It feels like stupidity when you end up broke and alone. No, Uncle Mike. Stupidity would be letting this destroy you. Stupidity would be giving up and letting her win. You want to know what smart looks like? Smart looks like a 75-year-old man who gets back up and builds something new. After we hung up, I sat in my living room thinking about what Keisha had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe the real test wasn't whether I could avoid being hurt, but how I responded to being hurt. I looked around the house that Diane and I had shared for so many years, and for the first time since she'd left, I didn't just see reminders of what I'd lost. I saw possibilities for what I could build. The 4th week after Diane left, I did something I hadn't done in over 40 years. I went to church. Mount Calvary Baptist, where my parents had taken me as a child, where I'd gotten baptized at 12 years old, where I'd gone every Sunday until I met Diane and started sleeping in on weekends. Pastor Williams had been replaced by a younger man named Pastor Jackson, but the sanctuary looked exactly the same. The same wooden pews, the same stained glass windows, the same feeling of peace that had comforted me as a child. I sat in the back row, feeling like a stranger in a place that had once been my second home, listening to Pastor Jackson preach about resilience and renewal. Sometimes, he said, God allows everything to be stripped away so we can discover who we really are underneath all the things we thought defined us. After the service, an elderly woman named Sister Morrison approached me. Aren't you Ruby Peters' boy? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Michael. I thought so. You look just like your daddy. I heard about your troubles with that wife of yours. I cringed, wondering how much of my business was being discussed around the neighborhood. Child, let me tell you something, Sister Morrison continued. I've been on this earth for 87 years, and I've seen good people get knocked down more times than I can count. But you know what separates the survivors from the casualties? The survivors remember that trouble don't last always. They remember that being knocked down is the same as being knocked out. She patted my arm with a hand that felt like paper but somehow conveyed incredible strength. Your mama and daddy raised you right. Don't let some woman's bad behavior make you forget who you are. I started going to church every Sunday after that, not because I'd found religion again, but because I'd found community. People who remembered me as Ruby and James's boy, who knew my character independent of what Diane thought of me. The 5th week, I swallowed my pride and got a second job bagging groceries at the supermarket where Diane and I used to shop together. The manager, a young man named Kevin, who couldn't have been more than 30, looked at my application with surprise. Mr. Peters, you're 75 years old. Are you sure you want to be on your feet all day bagging groceries? Son, I said, I need the work. I'll do whatever job you need doing, and I'll do it better than men half my age. He hired me on the spot, maybe out of respect for my determination, maybe out of pity. I didn't care which. I needed the money and I needed the purpose. My first day, I felt embarrassed when I saw neighbors and former coworkers in my checkout line. Here I was, a man who'd worked his way up to supervisor at the post office, reduced to asking paper or plastic. But by the end of the week, that embarrassment had transformed into something else. Pride. I was 75 years old and I was still fighting. I wasn't laying down and dying just because life had knocked me down. I was getting up, dusting myself off, and doing whatever it took to survive. Carlos came through my line one day and shook his head when he saw me. Man, this ain't right. You shouldn't have to be doing this at your age. Maybe not, I said, carefully bagging his groceries, but I am doing it, and I'm going to keep doing whatever I need to do until I figure out what comes next. What comes next? I straightened up and looked my old friend in the eye. I don't know yet, but I know it's going to be something better than what I lost. The 6th week brought the first real breakthrough. I was helping an elderly customer load groceries into her car when she mentioned that she was looking for someone to do yard work and minor repairs around her house. My regular handyman moved away, she said, and I can't find anyone reliable. What kind of work? I asked. Oh, lawn mowing, fixing leaky faucets, painting, that sort of thing. Nothing too complicated, but I need someone trustworthy. I thought about all the years I'd maintained my own house, all the skills my daddy had taught me in that little garage on the east side. Ma'am, I might be interested in that work. I've been doing home repairs for 50 years. Her name was Mrs. Patterson, and she hired me to start the following Saturday. Word spread through her neighborhood, and soon I had 3 regular customers, then 5, then 8. I was making more money doing handyman work on weekends than I was bagging groceries during the week. More importantly, I was using skills I'd forgotten I had, solving problems, making things better instead of just maintaining the status quo. You got yourself a little business going, Mrs. Chan observed one evening as I was loading my tools into my truck. I guess I do, I said, surprised by the realization. For the first time in 2 months, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Diane left, hope. But the biggest revelation came during week 7, when I was cleaning out Dion's old office and found a folder of papers she'd left behind. Bank statements, investment documents, and correspondence with someone named David Martinez. David Martinez, it turned out, was not just Diane's friend from her book club. He was a financial advisor who'd been helping her move our money into accounts I'd never heard of, accounts that only had her name on them. The papers showed a pattern going back almost 2 years. Systematic transfers, investment changes, even a secret credit card she'd opened using our house as collateral. This wasn't a sudden decision born out of midlife crisis. This was a carefully planned theft. I sat on the floor of that empty office, surrounded by evidence of my wife's betrayal, and felt the anger building again. But this time it was different. This time it was focused. He'd called me stupid, but she was the one who'd left evidence of her crimes scattered around like breadcrumbs. She'd been so confident in my ignorance that she hadn't even bothered to cover her tracks completely. I gathered all the papers and drove straight to the legal aid office downtown. If I couldn't afford a fancy lawyer, maybe I could find someone who believed in justice more than money. The young woman who met with me was named Sarah Williams, fresh out of law school and working for peanuts because she wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. "Mr. Peters," she said after reviewing the documents, "this is financial fraud. Your wife systematically moved marital assets without your knowledge or consent. We can definitely fight this." "How long will it take?" "Could be 6 months, could be 2 years, depends on how hard she fights back." "And how much will it cost me?" Sarah smiled for the first time since I'd walked into her office. "Mr. Peters, I've been looking for a case like this, a clear example of financial abuse that I can use to establish precedent for future cases. If you're willing to let me use your story to help other people in similar situations, I'll represent you for free." I thought about all the men like me who might be sitting in empty houses, wondering how they've been so blind, feeling stupid and ashamed and alone. "Mr. Williams," I said, "let's go get my money back." For the first time in 2 months, I went to bed that night feeling like I had a purpose beyond just surviving. I was going to fight back. And maybe in fighting for myself, I'd help other men avoid the trap I'd fallen into. The war wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But I was no longer fighting it alone, and I was no longer fighting it defenseless. I was 75 years old, and I was learning that it's never too late to discover you're stronger than you thought. Sarah Williams turned out to be exactly what I needed, a lawyer with the heart of a fighter and the brain of a chess master. Our first strategy meeting took place in her cramped office above a sandwich shop, with legal books stacked to the ceiling and the smell of pastrami drifting up from downstairs. "Mr. Peters," she said, spreading Diane's financial documents across her desk like a detective laying out evidence, "what your wife did isn't just morally wrong, it's legally criminal. We're looking at potential charges of financial elder abuse, fraud, and theft. You really think we can get the money back?" "I think we can get most of it back. The question is whether you want to pursue criminal charges or just focus on the civil case." I thought about that for a long moment. Part of me wanted to see Diane in handcuffs, wanted her to face the consequences of what she'd done. But another part of me just wanted my life back. "What would you recommend?" "Honestly, I'd recommend going after her with everything we've got. Not out of revenge, but because what she did to you, she's probably done to others. This David Martinez character, her financial advisor, I'm betting you're not his first victim." That possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. Diane had learned these manipulation tactics somewhere, and successful con artists rarely stop at one mark. "Let's do it," I said. "Let's go after all of them." The first step was getting a court order to freeze any remaining assets. Sarah filed an emergency motion, and within a week, we were sitting in Judge Hamilton's courtroom while Diane's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, argued that his client had every right to protect her separate property from my financial irresponsibility. I watched Diane from across the courtroom, this woman I'd shared a bed with for over 40 years, and she wouldn't even look at me. She sat there in a designer outfit I'd never seen before, whispering to her lawyer like I was a stranger she'd never met. "Your Honor," Sarah said when it was her turn to speak, "Mr. Peters isn't seeking to take his wife's separate property. He's seeking to recover marital assets that were systematically hidden and stolen over a period of 2 years." She presented the evidence we'd found, bank statements showing the transfers, emails between Dion and David Martinez discussing investment strategies, even receipts for the expensive clothes and jewelry Dion had been buying with money I didn't know we had. Judge Hamilton, a black woman in her 50s who reminded me of my sister Joyce, listened carefully to both sides before making her ruling. Based on the evidence presented, she said, "I'm issuing a temporary restraining order freezing all assets that can be traced to the marital estate. This court will not allow financial fraud to be disguised as property protection." Dion's face went white, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like maybe justice was possible. The real breakthrough came 3 weeks later when Sarah's investigation into David Martinez revealed that he wasn't a licensed financial advisor at all. He was a con artist who specialized in targeting middle-aged women going through emotional transitions, convincing them to move their family's money into accounts he controlled. "We found 4 of the victims," Sarah told me during one of our weekly meetings, "all women between 50 and 70, all married to men they described as simple or unambitious. Martinez would befriend them, convince them they deserved better, then help them steal their husband's money. So Diane wasn't even original in her cruelty, I said, feeling a bitter satisfaction. The good news is that the FBI is now involved. Martinez is looking at federal fraud charges, and anyone who worked with him, including your wife, could face conspiracy charges. While the legal case moved forward, I kept working my 2 jobs and building my handyman business. Word had spread through the neighborhood about my situation, and instead of pity, I found something I hadn't expected: respect. "Michael, I heard about what your wife did," said Mrs. Jackson, a customer whose kitchen faucet I had repaired. "I also heard you not letting it keep you down." "No choice but to keep moving forward," I said. "Yes, there is a choice. You could have given up, felt sorry for yourself, let her destroy your spirit, but you didn't. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Comments like that became common. People who'd known me for years were seeing me in a new light, not as the victim of a terrible betrayal, but as a man who'd found strength he didn't know he had. My nephew Tony drove down from Flint one weekend to check on me and found me in my garage, organizing tools for my handyman jobs. "Uncle Mike, you look different," he said. "Different how?" "Stronger, more like yourself than you've looked in years." I thought about that comment for days afterward. More like myself than I'd looked in years. Had I really been disappearing, even before Diane left? Had I been so focused on keeping her happy that I'd forgotten who I was? The answer came to me one Sunday after church when Sister Morrison invited me to her house for dinner. She lived in a small apartment filled with photographs of children and grandchildren, and she cooked the kind of meal that reminded me of my mother's kitchen. "Michael," she said as we sat down to eat, "can I ask you something personal?" "Yes, ma'am." "In all those years you were married to that woman, when was the last time you felt proud of yourself?" The question caught me off guard. I started to say something about being proud of our marriage, our house, the life we built together, but then I realized that wasn't what she was asking. "I don't know," I said finally. "It's been a long time." "I thought so. That woman didn't just steal your money, child. She's been stealing your confidence, your sense of purpose, your belief in your own worth. Some people do that, you know. They tear you down so gradually you don't even notice it's happening." Looking back, I could see the pattern. The way Diane had started questioning my decisions, dismissing my opinions, making me feel small and irrelevant, it had happened so slowly that I'd adapted to it without realizing I was losing pieces of myself. "The thing is," Sister Morrison continued, "now that she's gone, you're remembering who you really are. That's why you look stronger. You're not carrying the weight of someone else's disapproval anymore." 6 months after Diane left, Sarah called with news that changed everything. "Michael, David Martinez took a plea deal. He's agreed to testify against his accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence." What does that mean for Diane? It means she's looking at serious criminal charges unless she agrees to return the money and accept responsibility for what she did. Will she do that? Her lawyer called this morning. They want to make a deal. The settlement meeting took place in a conference room at Sarah's office. Diane sat across from me with her lawyer, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. She still wouldn't make eye contact, but I could see the fear in her posture. "Mrs. Peters is prepared to return 80% of the marital assets," her lawyer said. "In exchange, Mr. Peters agrees to drop any criminal charges and proceed with an uncontested divorce." 80%, Sarah said. "Your client stole 100% of the money. Why should my client accept less than full restitution?" "Because 20% of the funds were lost in investments that Mr. Martinez recommended." I looked at Diane, this woman who'd shared my life for over 40 years, and felt something I hadn't expected, not anger, but sadness. She'd thrown away our marriage and her own integrity for money she'd ended up losing to a con artist anyway. "Diane," I said, speaking directly to her for the first time since she'd walked out. "Why?" She finally looked at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. I felt trapped, Michael. I felt like I was disappearing. "So you made me disappear instead?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. We both knew what she'd done and why she'd done it. I'll take the 80%, I told Sarah. I just want this to be over. 2 weeks later, I had a check for $78,000, enough to pay off my house and start rebuilding my savings. More importantly, I had my self-respect back and a clear understanding of my own worth. The day the divorce was finalized, I celebrated by taking Mrs. Chen out to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town. "You are a free man now," she said, raising her teacup in a toast. "What you gonna do with your freedom?" I thought about all the possibilities ahead of me. My handyman business was thriving. I had money in the bank again. And for the first time in years, I felt excited about the future. "I'm going to live," I said. "Really live, not just exist." "Good," she said. "About time." That night, I sat on my front porch watching the sunset and realized that Diane had been right about one thing. I had been too simple, too content with small dreams. But she'd been wrong about everything else. There was nothing stupid about trust, nothing shameful about loyalty, nothing weak about love. Those weren't flaws in my character, they were strengths. And now that I knew the difference, I was ready to build something new. Sitting here today, 2 years after that terrible morning when my world fell apart, I can honestly say that losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. I know that sounds crazy, brothers, but hear me out. See, when you're 77 years old and you've rebuilt your life from nothing, you learn some things about yourself that you never knew before. You learn that strength isn't about avoiding pain, it's about surviving it. You learn that wisdom isn't about never making mistakes, it's about learning from the ones you make. Most importantly, you learn that your worth as a man isn't determined by what other people think of you, even when that other person shared your bed for over 40 years. My handyman business has grown into something I never expected. I've got 12 regular customers now, and I'm training 2 younger men who remind me of myself at their age. Good hearts, strong backs, and a willingness to work hard for an honest dollar. We call ourselves Peters and Sons Home Services, even though neither of the young men is actually my son. But family isn't always about blood, you know. Last month, I bought a brand new truck for the business. Nothing fancy, just a reliable Ford with room for all my tools and a payment I can afford. But when I drove it off the lot, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride in what I'd accomplished with my own hands and my own determination. The financial recovery has been slower but steady. Between the settlement money and the income from my business, I've been able to rebuild my savings and even start planning for the future again. Not the same future I'd planned with Diane, but a different one, maybe better one. I've been thinking about writing a book about my experience. Sarah, my lawyer, thinks it could help other men who've been through similar situations. "Your story shows that it's never too late to start over," she told me. "That's a message people need to hear." The legal case against David Martinez ended with him getting 5 years in federal prison. Deanne received 2 years probation and community service, which felt about right to me. I wasn't looking for revenge, just justice, and justice sometimes looks different than what you expect. I ran into her at the grocery store about 6 months ago. She looked smaller somehow, older, like the weight of what she'd done was pressing down on her shoulders. We nodded to each other politely, like acquaintances who'd known each other once upon a time. "How are you doing, Michael?" she asked, and I could hear genuine concern in her voice. "I'm doing well, Diane, really well." "I'm glad," she said, and I think she meant it. "I'm sorry about everything." "I know you are," I said. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Walking away from that conversation, I realized I felt no anger toward her anymore. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close to it. Understanding, maybe. She'd been as trapped by her own limitations as I'd been by mine, just in a different way. The biggest change in my life has been my relationship with the community. When you're married, especially when you're married to someone who demands all your attention, you can lose touch with the world outside your front door. Now I'm part of things again. I volunteer at the church every Tuesday, helping with their food pantry. I play dominoes with the older men at the community center on Friday nights. I've even started dating again, which at 77 feels both terrifying and exciting. Her name is Gloria, and she's a widow who lost her husband 3 years ago. We met at church, bonded over our shared experience of starting over late in life, and discovered we both love old movies and long walks. She's nothing like Diane, which I'm learning is exactly what I need. You're different from most men your age, Gloria told me on our third date. Different how? You're not bitter. You went through something that would have destroyed a lot of people, but you came out stronger instead of angry. I was angry for a while, I admitted. But anger's like carrying a hot coal in your pocket. It hurts you more than anyone else. The truth is, I'm grateful for the anger I felt, grateful for the pain, even grateful for the betrayal, not because I enjoyed any of it, but because surviving it taught me who I really am underneath all the roles I'd been playing. I'm not just somebody's husband or somebody's employee or somebody's anything. I'm Michael Peters, a man who can fix what's broken, build what's needed, and stand up after being knocked down. I'm a man who knows the difference between being alone and being lonely, between being simple and being stupid. If I could go back and talk to the man I was 3 years ago, the man who thought his biggest problem was his wife sleeping in the guest room, I'd tell him this. Don't be afraid to take up space in your own life. Don't confuse keeping the peace with losing yourself. Don't let anyone, not even someone you love, convince you that you're less than you are. And when life knocks you down, because it will, remember that getting back up isn't just about survival. It's about discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined. My daddy used to say, son, a man's character isn't revealed when things are going well. It's revealed when everything falls apart. I understand what he meant now. Everything I'd built with Diane fell apart, but everything that made me who I am, all the character and strength and resilience I'd inherited from my parents and developed through decades of honest living, that stuff was still there. Diane could take my money, but she couldn't take my work ethic. She could break my heart, but she couldn't break my spirit. She could call me stupid, but she couldn't make it true. To the young men listening to this story, I want you to understand something. Love is important, but it should never require you to diminish yourself. Marriage is a partnership, not a disappearing act. If someone truly loves you, they'll want you to be the fullest, strongest version of yourself, not a smaller, quieter version that's easier to control. And to the men my age who might be going through something similar, it's not too late. Whatever you've lost, whatever's been taken from you, whatever betrayal you're facing, it's not too late to start over. You're stronger than you think, smarter than they told you, and more valuable than they made you feel. That proverb I started with, a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. I understand it differently now. My heart planned a life with Diane that would last until we were old and gray together. But the Lord directed my steps through the fire of betrayal and out the other side into something better. Sometimes what feels like the end is really just the beginning of a chapter you never knew you were strong enough to write. Last Sunday, I was sitting on my front porch after church, reading the newspaper in the late afternoon sun, when my neighbor's granddaughter rode by on her bicycle. She's about 8 years old, all pigtails and missing teeth, and she stopped to show me the training wheels her grandfather had just taken off. Mr. Michael, look, I can ride all by myself now. That's wonderful, sweetheart. How does it feel? She thought about it for a moment, her little face serious with concentration. It feels scary and exciting at the same time, like I might fall, but I might fly. After she rode away, I sat there thinking about her words. Scary and exciting at the same time. That's exactly what starting over at 77 feels like. Every day brings the possibility of falling, but also the possibility of flying. Tomorrow, I'm driving up to Flint to see my nephew Tony and his family. Next week, Gloria and I are going to see a jazz concert at the Fox Theater. Next month, I'm starting a financial literacy class at the Community Center for Men who've been through divorces, sharing what I learned about protecting yourself from financial abuse. These aren't grand plans, not the kind of big dreams Diane accused me of lacking, but they're my plans, made by my choice for my happiness, and that makes them perfect. I still live in the same house where Deanne and I spent over 40 years together, but it's my house now. I've painted the walls, colors I like, arranged the furniture the way I want it, and filled it with the sound of my own laughter and the voices of friends who actually enjoy my company. Some evenings, when the light hits the kitchen just right, I remember the good times Diane and I shared in this space. Not with sadness, but with the kind of gentle nostalgia you feel for a story that ended the way it needed to end, even if it wasn't the ending you expected. I've learned that every man's story has chapters he wouldn't choose to write, pages he'd rather tear out and pretend never happened. But those difficult chapters are often the ones that teach you the most about who you really are when everything else is stripped away. My story isn't over yet. God willing, I've got years left to build new relationships, learn new skills, maybe even fall in love again in a way that honors both my heart and my dignity. The best chapters might still be ahead of me. If this story hit home, if you've ever felt invisible in your own life or worthless in your own home, I want you to know something. You matter. Your dreams matter. Your happiness matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, not even someone who sleeps next to you every night. Subscribe to his stories and share your own experience in the comments if this story resonates with you. Too many men suffer in silence, thinking they're the only ones going through these struggles. Don't forget to subscribe and tell a brother who needs to hear he's not alone. This is His Stories, where men rise above their circumstances together, and brothers, we do rise. Maybe not the way we plan, maybe not when we expect it, but we rise. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover that you never needed anyone's permission to be magnificent. Remember that.